So here we are with chapter 12, part 3. I'm Professor Green. Let's talk about cost pressures and pressures for local responsiveness. So first talking about these cost pressures for cost reductions, because as we said, right, there are two main components to having competitive advantage, right? And one of them is reducing cost. So there are strong industries in producing commodity type products that fill universal needs. So food, cell phones, telecommunications, etc. And these are when tastes and preferences in different nations are similar, if not identical. So people need sugar, they need semiconductors, they need chips for your cell phone, etc. And when major competitors are both based in low-cost locations, when there is a permanent excess capacity. And so we just need more of these things continuously. And where consumers are powerful and face low switching costs. So very quickly, can we move from, Samsung to the iPhone, or can we move from, one sugar producer to another? And companies sometimes may hold prices low to increase the global market share. So even if the value is increasing and they can bring the price up, potentially they might just keep it low so that they can then move into other markets at a low value, at a low price. So here's a nice little graph that talks about pressures for cost reductions as those go from low to high, and then pressures for local responsiveness. And so we have examples of 3 different firms and how you can handle these types of things. Let's work first with firm B here. Where the pressure for local responsiveness is high, but the pressure for cost reductions is a little bit low. So this is where we talk about there are differences in consumer tastes and preferences. And as I said, a lot of my colleagues from Thunderbird have gone on to work for P&G, Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, and they spend their whole career focusing on how to make a product better in the local markets, right? And usually they are from a certain country and now they're working in the United States, et cetera. So at least they have vast knowledge of lots of different cultures and understanding, right? There are differences in infrastructure and traditional practices. We're going to have one slide on each of these things in a minute. Differences in distribution channels, host government demands, and the rise of regionalism, and how people sometimes like to have a whole dispersed product for a whole region, like all of Europe or all of the Americas, et cetera. So firms are facing these pressures. They need to differentiate their products and their marketing strategies in each country. As you can see, no surprise, right? Marketing is a very popular subject at Thunderbird. So the first thing are the differences in consumer tastes and preferences. This is when a consumer taste and preferences differ significantly from country to country. And firms face strong pressures for local responsiveness. We see this in the example that they give in the book, which I think is so interesting, that here in the United States, we have pickup trucks. Actually, the F-150, they say, is one of the most popular cars sold in the whole entire world. And definitely in the United States, because we use pickup trucks for a lot of different things, not just for construction. People will use a pickup truck just for convenience as a second or a third car. And that's not the case at all. If you go to Europe, you will only see a pickup truck really on a construction site, and the same in Asia as well. So again, things can need to be adjusted. Also, the example that they give in IKEA, I think, is such a great one because, personally, I lived through it, that IKEA, when they first came to the United States, needed to adapt for the US market. I was familiar with IKEA because I'd been living in Europe for a long time and I loved it. But then in the US, right, they needed to make the cups and glasses a little bit bigger. Our kitchens here are bigger. They needed to, change a lot of things that they thought would work here easily, but they didn't. Also in China, they needed to open up a huge balcony section because so many of the apartments have balconies in China, and also people don't have as many cars in China as well. And so here in the US, you'll know you go to Costa Mesa or all these IKEA places, and they have huge parking lots, but in China and in Asia, they needed the locations downtown, and then delivery services to bring them the goods. The differences in infrastructure and traditional practices. So this is where we talk about, the UK having the driver's side on the opposite side, the right hand of the car, while here in the US, we drive on the left-hand side of the car. Also 110 versus 240 volts. So whenever you go abroad, you need a converter. So when there are differences in infrastructure or traditional practices, there's a need to customize products. There are three more differences in distribution channels. So I found this so interesting, right? That a firm's marketing strategies might be influenced by differences in distribution channels between countries, which may necessitate delegation of marketing functions to national subsidiaries. And a big piece of this, about the hard sell versus the soft sell. Here in the United States, we're much more in your face about what you need to buy. But in Asia, that's not necessarily the case. Also in supermarkets, right? We take it for granted here in the United States that we have supermarkets on every street corner. But if you've ever been to Russia, you'll notice that there are smaller markets that people use. There's only like 1% of people who are using supermarkets in Russia. So again, a big change when we talk about distribution. Then last thing, host government demands. Economic and political demands imposed by host country governments. And so the example here are rail cars where, the rail car, they were saying the example is that the parts for the rail car need to be made in that country where they're selling it. And I thought that was also really interesting. Also, we come back to, they talk about pharmaceuticals and the hard sell versus the soft sell, but also pharmaceuticals here too, because each country has rules about which drugs you can sell over the counter versus a prescription, etc. And then the last one is this rise of regionalism. So regional convergence can influence product offerings within a block of nations. And so if you're ever in the film industry, you'll see this as well, because we'll sell to, Germany, Austria, Switzerland as one region and not necessarily as one country. But bigger regions will be the EU, North America, maybe Latin America. They have similar preferences. China, Hong Kong, Singapore is one. The Middle East, and then Russia and the Soviet states. So again, really big decisions when you come and think about creating a new product and then marketing that product. Who is going to be your target audience? So choosing a strategy, there are 4 basic strategies when we talk about global markets: global standardization, localization, transnational, and international. Let's look at the next couple of slides. We're going to go through each of these. What is global standardization? Oh, there's a, I was looking for the visual here. So you'll see. We're going to talk about global standardization, which has high pressure versus cost reductions. This is all about, selling the same sugar across the whole entire world, and low pressure for local responsiveness. Then we're going to hop into localization strategy. This is where the pressure is high for local responsiveness and low for cost reductions. That's something about those pickup trucks. It's a good example. Then we're going to talk about transnational strategy, and then international strategy, which is not necessarily very successful for very long, as we'll see in the case of Xerox and how they lost market share to Canon. Let's go ahead and talk about the first one, global standardization strategy. This focuses on increasing profitability and profit growth by repeating the cost reductions that come from economies of scale, learning effects, and local economies. The goal is to pursue a low-cost strategy on a global scale. It makes sense, and there are strong pressures for cost reductions, and demands for local responsiveness are minimal. So again, sugar could be a big one, but also semiconductors. We've talked about that quite a few times. Intel, Texas Instruments, is very much they're very much organizations where thankfully they've met the globe has met in made a common semiconductor. The technology is the same, so they can then produce that for the whole entire world. So if you buy semiconductor in China or the US or Germany, it's going to be the same. And the price then is dropping and dropping. They say the price every 6 months drops by double or something like this, because there are so many more efficiencies and so many economies of scale that they can do, so many learning effects. And that's really helpful because we use these semiconductors in so much of our technology. We also have a localization strategy, and this is all about focusing on increasing profitability by customizing the firm's goods or services to match the taste and preference in different markets. So being very particular. And then this is about the pickup trucks again, where we're creating pickup trucks only for the US market for primarily. But we're talking about small, efficient cars, fuel efficient cars in Japan and Europe, right? That, wouldn't necessarily survive on our LA freeways very easily. So it makes sense when there are substantial differences across nations with regard to consumer tastes and preferences, and where cost pressures are not too intense, right? Because there's so much competition. I mean, so much differentiation in what people want that they need to create two different products, and that people are willing to pay a higher price for what exactly it is that they need. Then's the transnational strategy. This is a fine art, let's say, right? That very difficult to achieve, but great when people can do it. Caterpillar is one of those countries that has done it. They produce their products in one major factory, and then when the construction piece gets shipped to the local market, then they augment the components locally. So the firm simultaneously faces both strong cost pressures and strong pressures from local responsiveness, because Caterpillar has a lot of competition from Komatsu of Japan, but they've done really, really well. I had a colleague in business school whose parents worked for Caterpillar, and they worked really hard. They were really into it, and had sent their son to Germany to study because Caterpillar was just growing so quickly and has been very successful at that. There have been attempts to simultaneously achieve low costs, differentiate the product at the same time, and foster a multi-directional flow between different subsidiaries. It's very complex. The two main researchers who have done a lot of research in this area are Chris Bartlett from Australia and Sumatra Ghoshal from India. And they spent a lot of time and effort figuring out how companies can do this most effectively. And again, it's a fine art, as I've said. On the other hand, on the flip side, the international strategy, this involves taking products first produced for the domestic market and then selling them internationally with only minimal local customization. This is what Xerox did. Started in the US. They were really the only people in the copier business. They could then quickly ship these products all over the world. People had to adjust because they needed copiers. But soon enough came Canon along and started to replicate their technology. And very quickly, Xerox lost market share, right? It makes sense when there are low cost pressures and low pressures for local responsiveness. And so let's talk the next slide or two about how that didn't work for Xerox. There's an evolution of strategy sometimes too, as competition increases, international and localization strategies become less viable. Very true, right? So maybe Xerox could start with that, but they should have seen initially that they would have to adjust quickly, bring their price down, or make them somehow special compared to Canon. So they need to shift to a global standardization strategy or a transnational strategy in advance of competitors. And that's what this next slide says. As competitors emerge, these strategies become less viable, that they need to move into one of these other two. Just a few more slides here. Let's talk again about strategic alliances, even though we've already discussed that a little bit in this course. Again, these are agreements between potential or actual competitors. They form formal joint ventures or short-term agreements. It's the nice thing from an international business point of view is that these alliances have really risen significantly in recent decades. People are finding it easy and easier to find a partner to work with abroad, and makes their transition to working abroad a little bit smoother, as we've spoken about in this course. There's some advantages, as again we've spoken about. They facilitate the entry into a foreign market, allow firms to share the fixed costs. They bring together complementary skills that they couldn't do on their own, and they can help establish technological standards potentially, right, for an industry that might benefit. There's an example of a strategic alliance here with the movie business that Warner Brothers partnered with a Chinese partner, and you can see these famous actors here on the red carpet for the premiere of their film in Beijing, because Beijing, China, is such a huge market for films, and it again allowed the Warner Brothers to know a little bit more about the film industry in China before they did it themselves. The disadvantages of strategic alliances: it can give competitors low-cost routes to new technology and markets. For sure, as we've discussed before, it's important not to give away too much, and then they steal that information and build their own business. You can also give away more in a strategic alliance that it receives. I just sneeze. And so, how do we make the strategic alliances work? First thing, the key to good successful business is choosing the right partner, whether it's your own partnership or you're an alliance. Collect as much information as possible, gather data from third parties, not just the partner that you're thinking about working with, and get to know that potential partner well before committing. When I partnered with my distributor for my yoga DVDs abroad, before I signed the deal for the UK and Germany, I made sure that I went to their offices, I interviewed them. I was also the DVDs then were going to be shown on different sports channels throughout Europe. And I wanted to make sure that I really knew who these people were before I signed away the rights for my products. There's also an alliance structure that can be set up. It can be designed to make it difficult to transfer technology not meant to be transferred. This happened with Boeing when they worked with Japan and to create the 767. So they made sure that the Japanese partner that they were working with didn't necessarily have all the access to all the technology that Boeing had within its organization. We can also write contractual safeguards into alliance agreement to guard against this opportunism. So like an agreement that says that you can't go out and just copy the technology and form your own company, an NDA. Both parties can agree in advance to swap skills and technologies that the other covets. So they can maybe say at the beginning, okay, I'll give you this skill if you give me that skill, and make it clear as to what skills they're able to copy. And then once you have the alliance, how can you manage it so it continues to work? I love this term, relational capital, for the companies, for the managers to really build these interpersonal relationships, right? So you have like a duty and you have someone on the other side who you're working with. There's a lot of value in that. You should also promote learning from the alliance partners. So making sure that the partners feel like they're getting something out of it as well. And promote the diffusion of their knowledge throughout the organization. So not just at the top levels, but at all levels. And we saw where this went really well in Northern California with the Chevy Nova. Toyota and GM decided to venture and partner on this. And Chevy Nova is one of the most successful car models in the world today. So let's quickly review the summary. We've explained the concept of international business strategy, what that is. We've recognized how firms can increase revenue and profit by expanding globally, right? Can be a really good thing to go abroad. understand how pressures for cost reduction and local responsiveness influence the strategic choice, and identify the different international strategies for competing and their pros and cons. And then explain the pros and cons of using strategic alliances to support these international strategies. Great. Thank you again for joining me. This was chapter 12. I look forward to seeing you in chapter 13.